And we're on. Brilliant. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for this top tips for passing your PPL examination flight workshop. Again, this one's brought to you by Astral Aviation Consulting on behalf of the UK CAA. My name is Chris Kidd. For those of you that have seen me before, you'll know and love the format. For those of you that are unfamiliar with us, we are an aviation consultancy contracted by the CAA to provide you with free safety resources through a dedicated GA safety campaign, which this workshop is part of. So, if you want to stay in the loop with events and resources, please have a look in the chat box now. We're going to put our website address in there. It's got a whole host of useful stuff in it, not only replays of this webinar and various other webinars, but a whole host of other resources such as articles, links to useful videos, etc., etc. Anyway, moving on to this evening. I am delighted again to be once again joined this evening by Matt Lane. I'm also joined by Nigel Wilson. Talking about Matt, for those of you that don't know him, he's the head of training and an active single and multi-engine FI and flight examiner. Nigel is also the head of training at an ATO, an FI, FE and a display pilot, and also runs Easy PPL Ground School. Good evening, both of you. Right then, over the course of the next hour and a half, so this is an hour and a half special for those of you that weren't expecting it, because there's quite a lot to get through. We're going to break this workshop down into 6 sections, mainly based on the form that you all know and love, SRG 2128, the examiner report for PPLA skills test. However, the flow will follow the most common order of events on the test itself. So for those of you that have been tested before, you will know and love this. And of course, Matt and Nigel, being active examiners and instructors, have done this one over and over. So in section 1, Matt's going to cover pre-flight ops. We'll then move on to section 2, where Nigel will discuss en route procedures, including the practice diversion. Matt will then cover general airwork in section 3. Section 4, Nigel will cover approach and landing. Then Matt will talk through abnormal and emergency procedures and provide a brief summary. Then finally in section 6, it will be time for the time-honored tradition of Q&A. So although this workshop is designed around the PPL skills test, it's just as useful for people who may be looking to refresh or renew their PPL or LAPL ratings, or just want to revise some aspects of the PPL skill set itself. The workshop's also designed to discuss some tips and thoughts. However, in all cases, you should follow the direction of your allocated examiner and your individual school procedure orders. So, as always with these things, we really want you to get involved. So as we go through, please put any comments you might have in the chat box, and then we'll pick up on those at the end of the section. And of course, there'll be many of you, probably a broad range of people in this workshop that have not only lots and lots of experience, but to relatively inexperienced. So we'd really like to hear about your experiences again, so put those in the chat box as well. Of course, you will undoubtedly have some questions as you go, so please pop those in the Q&A box and we'll try and either cover those as we go or pick up on them at the end. For those of you that have been following us or following this, you will notice that we've put a little competition in for this one. So we want to reach as many people as possible with our workshops and other safety related information, which is why we're really keen that we get as many of you as we can on our mailing list and also on our social media to make it easier for us to send you content so that you don't miss anything. To that end, one lucky attendee tonight will win a £250 voucher to spend at the Transair shop, along with some other goodies courtesy of us. As you, I'm sure, are aware, Transair offer a wide range of flight equipment, so I'm sure you'll have no trouble finding something that you want to spend it on. However, to be in a chance of winning, all you have to do is follow us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram. You can find both of these accounts using the search bar, or use the handle at Astral Aviation Consulting. The 15-minute timer is on, so once you've done that, please let us know in the chat box. So follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. You've got 15 minutes. Tell us when you've done it in the chat box, and we'll pick one lucky winner out of a hat at the end. Oh, look, AG's done it already. Adrian Gardner, first in. He's done it already. So keep them coming, please. Right then, that's almost enough from me. But before we do move on to the meat of it, I really would like to find out who's with us this evening. So as always, if you're watching live, this poll will pop up on your screen. If you're watching on demand, then you won't be able to interact, but please do test your knowledge anyway as we go through the workshops. and obviously go through the polls. So this one we're looking for to find out who is with us. So question 1, who's with us this evening? I already know, I can see some familiar names in there already, but let us know who's with us. Are you a PPL student, a license holder, a lapsed license holder, or others? So if you're other, let us know in the chat box, please. Give you a few more seconds to complete that. Great, thanks. Let's have a look at the results on that one then. What have we got this evening? Brilliant. So we've got 34% PPL students, 52% license holders, 7% the lapsed license holder, and 7% others. What have we got? We've got some PPLHs in there as well, which is great to see. So really good to see so many students with us this evening. Hopefully, we're going to be able to tap into the vast knowledge of Matt and Nigel as we go through. And if you're a student, of course, you're probably going to be doing this PPL or LAPLS test for the first time. These guys are old hands, so they should be able to help you out in that way. Right then, so that is literally enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Matt now, who's going to talk about pre-flight ops and departures.
Thanks, Chris. Not too sure about the old, but there we go. we'll take that. So yeah, right. Let's go on to have a look at pre-flight ops and departure. Then we're going to start with another poll, and we'll put this up. So let's have a look at poll 2. So what are the recommended CA safety factors to apply for takeoff and landing? 1.25, 1.43, 1.33, and 1.43. 1.43 and 1.33, or no need, they're taken into account in the aircraft charts. So there we go, we've got 4 choices for you to pick from there as well. And just to remember, this is all a bit of fun. We're not taking any results from this. We don't know who's answered what at all. We just this is just like I say, to just get our brains working and have a look at it. So you've got a choice there: 1.25, 1.33, and 1.43. How do they all break down, or no need at all? So hopefully everybody's had a chance to have a go at that now. So Chris, can we have a look at what the answer is? So yeah, B, 1.33 and 1.43, and they're from the various safety sense leaflets and the Skyway Code. And there we go, we've got a bit of a split there as well. I will say there was a couple of nuances in there as well. So 1.25, you may have seen that because that's the EASA, the commercial performance B recommended factor as well. So if some of you are doing ATPL training or whatever, you may have seen that 1.25 there as well. The other thing as well, answer D, no need to take into account the aircraft charts. Yes, some charts and some performance charts do actually have a safety factor in there. I think I did a test last week, PA 28-140, the takeoff distance chart had that factor already in there as well. So just have a look at what charts you're doing. But if you want to read up about them in the safety sense leaflets or Skyway Code, has some really great explanations of that. Brilliant. Thanks. Let's move on then and have a look at what we're going to talk about in pre-flight ops. So this is all about your pre-flight preparation and the takeoff and the actual departure from the airfield. So before we actually get anywhere near the aircraft then, the examiner is going to be looking for you to talk them through a whole bunch of pre-flight documentation and planning actions as well. So we're going to have in there the mass and balance calculations, the performance calculations, and very much the weather. So the examiner will be looking for you to use sources such as 214, 215, and any relevant TAFs and METARs as well. We should also very much in our navigation planning be looking at any NOTAMs and other threats or late breaking airspace restrictions that are going to be relevant to the flight there as well. And the other key part of the documentation, not just your planning for the flight, is all about the aircraft. So your examiner is going to want to see the aircraft documents and the insurance to know that it's insured for the test and for what you're planning to do as well. And this is the first bit where you can really impress your examiner by taking them through all of this documentation, knowing what it's all about, preempting any questions, and demonstrating things like you clearly know how many hours are available on the aircraft for the next maintenance and where things can be found in the documentation. Have it all available and to hand there as well. Your examiner should have briefed you on whether they want to observe you doing a full check A or a transit check, depending on whether the aircraft's flown or not. And again, this is a good time to make sure you've got everything prepared and ready. You know, if you've already managed to check the oil and you know that it's good, or if you're going to have to clean the windscreen, that's already done. What you don't want to be doing is running around trying to find oil or cleaning materials or something that's missing in the aircraft as you're there with your examiner doing the check A or the pre-flight check. So the more you can get on top of it, the better. When you start then actually walk to the aircraft and you're strapping in and getting in, that's the good time to do that passenger brief to the examiner. You know, you can take a bit of slow time to demonstrate the safety equipment, the entry exits, how to use the belts, and ask any passenger questions. That's the good time to do it in an unhurried manner when you can, you know, you're not distracted by other things like RT and checks and that as well. Then on to engine start and taxi. And again, this is the time when you can really set the pace and set the tone for the whole flight as well. So be confident and capable with your checks. Use the checklist as required, as appropriate, but take your time. Don't rush checks or miss them. And again, like I say, you can set the tone for the examiner right from the very start of the flight and give confidence that you're a competent, capable pilot there as well. And hopefully as well, during the briefing and in the prep, you will have known the airfield restrictions, the airfield operations of the day as well. But one thing you can sometimes do is verbalize the taxi plan as well before you go off. And that just reinforces it in your mind. And again, gives the examiner confidence that you know where you're going, what you're doing. Something like, I'm going to turn right out of parking, continue along taxiway A to hold Charlie, and we're going to do our power checks and get our clearance there. You know, and again, that just, you know, reinforces what you're going to do and lets the examiner know that as well. Take your time, as I said, with the pre-takeoff procedures, but make sure you're actually checking things as well. And that, you know, for example, on the RPM drops, on the magneto checks, you can verbalize, you know, right mag selected, drop of 100, back to both, RPM recovered. And just giving the, I say, the examiner confidence that you are checking things and you're checking the limits diligently as well. Then on to the takeoff. Hopefully you will give some kind of pre-takeoff emergencies brief as per your school procedures, and complete a normal takeoff and departure. And the key thing here is, you know, don't try and do anything that you haven't done before. Test day is not the day or the time to be experimenting. So just do what you normally do, what is routine to you, take it calmly. And, you know, the pressure of the examiner in the cockpit may think that you know, you need to do everything quick and slick, but just keep to your normal pace, keep everything as normal as to what you would normally do, and you've done all the way through training as well. And again, at this stage as well, I talked about setting the tone for the test as well. Your initial RT, try and keep to standards, keep clear, keep that accuracy, brevity in your RT transmissions. And again, that will give your examiner confidence from the beginning that you're on top of this, and it will set you up for a good flight. Okay, let's have a look at some common errors then, Chris. I'm not going to talk through all of these, so we've touched on some of them, but there's some themes here as well. Yeah, make sure the RT is slick and competent as you can get it. And the other ones are really about having everything together and being familiar with things. You know, if you don't know where the insurance is, or you don't know where to find the insurance validity date on your aircraft docs, you don't want to be hunting for it with an examiner sat peering over your shoulder. Make sure you're familiar with it from before. And the other things are just about, like I say, not rushing things, keeping your normal controlled pace of things. So some top tips, if we can move on. So this is You may have checklists or guides or particular school ways of doing things, but something that I recommend is just think about in your preparation one, what's the weather doing today? The aircraft, all the docks, is it serviceable? Have we done the mass and balance? Have we done the performance? Navigation, have we planned it? What are the NOTAMs to affect us today? Is the chart up to date? And so on. And threats, what threats are there today to this flight? And what are we going to do to mitigate them? Okay, let's move on, please. And we already talked about the inspection, the checks, and the RT. But there's the banner over the top of it. Make sure all of this is practiced. On your skills test day is not the day to be unsure about anything. So hopefully you may have done some mock tests running up to the actual tests. Make sure you practice all of these elements of the day. So try and run any mock tests as real to the test day as you can as well. Excellent. Hopefully that's some use. I'm going to hand over now to Nigel. We've got airborne. We've successfully departed the airfield, and we're going to go and do the en route phase. So over to you, Nigel.
Very quickly before Nigel does crack on with that, I'd like to pick up on a couple of points that Matt mentioned there, which really hit home to me. Three of them really. One is the preparation, and secondly the practice. So the practice, you can practice and practice and practice. And of course, practice does actually make perfect, but there's always going to be something on the day that just doesn't, it doesn't fit. The weather will be different, or the wind will be something that you've not seen before. And that for me is where the preparation comes back in, because you've prepared so well for it, you can then deal with that anomaly and take it in your stride. And then the other thing I'd like to pick up on, Matt, which is something again that I didn't used to do, but then I naturally now do, is the verbalization of things in the cockpit. Good point you make about the mag drop, for example, or I'm going to taxi over there and stop here, blah, blah, blah. So you might think on test day with the examiner there that you're talking too much. But of course, if you think of it the other way around, if you don't say anything, how does the examiner know what you're thinking? Obviously they don't. So absolutely, I think the verbalization, the preparation and the practice are really key points there. Sorry to jump in. Over to you, Nigel.
That's fine. Yep, examiners are not mind readers. You need to remember that. So let's have a look at en route procedures then. So let's start with a poll, shall we? So what's the formula for estimating max drift? So answers as you require on the screen there. So wind speed divided by airspeed in nautical miles per minute, or wind speed divided by 2, or your wind speed times the airspeed in nautical miles per minute, or wind speed divided by airspeed. And I'm hoping everyone's familiar with maximum drift. Basically what it is the maximum amount you would change your heading by if the wind was at 90 degrees to you, and that's obviously going to depend on the strength of the wind. Right, so hopefully you've all done that. Let's have a look at the correct answer then. So the correct answer is the wind speed divided by the airspeed in nautical miles per minute, and glad to see most of you got it right. So there we go. Okay, so as an example then, if typically training aeroplanes in most flying organizations cruise around about 90 knots. So what that means, if you plug that into the formula, is that you need to take the wind speed and use 2/3 of that to be the maximum amount you would change your heading by to account for the wind, if that wind was at 90 degrees to you. The important thing with that, of course, is to make a note of it somewhere and put it down on your map or your plog, so you don't forget that it is in the heat of the moment when you're having to do this by the seat of your pants, as you'll find out a bit later on. So let's have a look at the en route procedures then. So what an examiner's looking for when it comes to the en route section is really a number of things that you can see on the screen, but mainly we're looking for accurate flying, some good decision making, and for you to manage the aircraft and the flight. It's a real world experience in the skills test. So, real things happen. The weather isn't quite as planned. So you'll find that you can change things in flight, and providing you tell the examiner what you're doing, then it doesn't leave us to guess what you're having to recalculate or to replan around. So you've worked on the flight plan before you take off. So you should be familiar with the route, and hopefully you've had plenty of map reading experience and dead reckoning using all of the tips and tricks that your instructor has taught you. So all you've got to do is just go out and fly your plan as you normally would do. That's the key thing. Shouldn't be doing anything different on the skills test. So fly as accurately as you can, maintain the altitude you've planned it at, or the one that ATC asks you to fly, that's different. Maintain your heading and maintain your speed. So that might sound easy, but don't forget, you can get easily distracted with everything that's going on. And then before you know that, you've wandered off heading by 10 degrees or so. And the way to solve that is to use a robust and effective work cycle, such as LAI, lookout, attitude, and instruments. And that way you'll maintain your situational awareness and also be able to fly accurately by splitting your time between those three things. So the examiner's also looking for you to maintain your awareness of where you are, maintaining your situational awareness by using that work cycle will help you remain orientated and aware of any airspace, timing, revisions, and allow you to keep your plug up to date. I can answer one of the questions there already. No, you're not going to be allowed to use SkyDemon if you haven't, even if you haven't got a route planned, unfortunately, because it is a moving map and it gives you an indication of where you are in relation to the real world. So there's no SkyDemon allowed on the skills test, I'm afraid. So basically, after you've done a little bit of nav, at some point, examiners going to give you a scenario that requires you to divert to either an alternative airfield or an alternative navigation point. You've got to come up with a plan in the cockpit now to navigate there, taking into account the wind and with some appropriate timing estimates. And don't forget that when the going gets tough and it gets busy, the little mantra we always use is aviate first, then navigate, and then communicate in that order. Okay, so at some point in this section, you'll find the skills test is always sort of scenario based. So you might find that the examiner will give you a scenario of something happening. So for example, you might now find that you've inadvertently entered IMC or a cloud, and you'll be expected to complete a 180-degree turn on instruments to get yourself out of that cloud. Once again, the examiner will be very precise with the words that he uses, typically such as, you know, take me out of the cloud, maintaining the airspeed and maintaining the altitude. So once the turn's complete and your head's up and out again, you then probably might have to do a position fix. That's usually either a VOR fix or a VOR DME fix. And then after that, possibly do an interception onto a radio aid, which is typically a VOR radial, and track that radial as requested by the examiner. So all things told then, throughout that flight, you also need to manage the aircraft and manage what's going on. So regular checks, such as Frida checks, there's no need to go overboard with them and overdo them to death, but make sure that if you get a quiet period, stick one in, okay? And don't forget to talk out loud so that the examiner knows what you're doing. Again, it helps you maintain the situational awareness of the aircraft. It may, helps you with the D, for example, to double check the compass and the DI so you don't wander off inadvertently because of an error between the DI and the compass. So let's have a look at some common errors then, shall we? So typically there's quite a lot of stuff in here. These are sort of general things that we find as examiners people do, poorly, shall we say, or just under pressure, applying the wind in the wrong direction when you've worked out what the max drift is. Track crawling is another one. Do it as you've been taught. Track crawling, in other words, going from feature to feature along the path of your route. That's not navigating. That's a classic one someone told me once. That's not navigating, that's map reading. And there is a distinct difference between the two. We need you to navigate. Misidentifying features is another one that's commonly done, and confirmation bias is a real big thing you need to be aware of. Just because there's a big town in front of you doesn't necessarily mean it's the town that you think it is. So make sure you positively identify your waypoints and make sure that it really is the one that you want. Scan breakdown, again, keeping that scan going is going to help you to fly accurately. Managing the workload effectively, don't be afraid to tell our air traffic control to stand by if you're busy in the middle of doing something else. Communication comes last, and typically forgetting the freezer checks altogether because the pressure's on. So how about some top tips then? Let's have a look at those. So keeping the work cycle going, that's going to be a really good little mantra for you. Look out, attitude, come and have a look at the instruments. The majority of the time you should be looking out, and the confirmation of your attitude based on those instruments. And don't forget the heading and the altitude comes into there as well. Spending some excessive time, don't spend excessive time heads in the cockpit, looking at plogs, looking at charts and things like that. If anything, put your map out of the way so you're not distracted by looking down at it all of the time. In fact, when you do want to look at the chart, then hold it up in front of the instruments or in front of the camera, in front of the windscreen, so that it is at eye level, so you're not having to move your head down and up all the time, and you can easily focus between the outside and your chart in front of you. The other thing with navigation is don't rush and set off on a navigation leg before you've got the aircraft completely settled. So typically after departure, if you're going to, for example, set course overhead, go out far enough so that you get to your required altitude, you get the aeroplane trimmed, and then all you've got to do when you get to the overhead is to set course and note the time down, and then carry on with the checks as required. And like I said, don't be afraid to tell ATC to stand by if you're busy doing stuff. So, they are there to serve you, not the other way around. So that's it from me on this bit. We'll go over to Matt again for some general airwork procedures.
Thanks, Nigel. So I will just answer one question actually, because it's relevant to my pre-flight plan section and this navigation one. Use of SkyDemon or other electronic planning aids for the planning. Yes, it's entirely permitted for test candidates to use SkyDemon to plan their routes and produce a plog, and use that SkyDemon produced plog if they wish as part of. But what the examiner will expect to see is that you've appropriately annotated and marked your chart, as well as any electronically produced devices. And the examiner will also probably ask you some relevant questions on that plog to ascertain that you understand where the figures and the corrections in that plog have come from, and you haven't just blindly done a printout and taken numbers at face value. So you've got an ability to just do a common sense check of what the system is producing you. And it can go wrong as well. Somebody gave me a plog and they'd on an IRR test, and they'd actually gone to an NDB that was in Norway rather than in the UK, and the plog gave a rather a long leg on that section, but they haven't spotted it. So yeah, make sure you have a good sense check of what the computer is giving you. So
just before you dive into that, Matt, sorry, I've got a question here from Mark Scott, which is appropriate to the planning side as well. Will the examiner expect to demonstrate use of the whiz wheel?
No, just what Matt said. How you plan the flight is up to you, but if you are using an aid to take the hard work out of the equation, the examiner will probably quiz you to double check you understand the planning process and how those figures have been derived, as Matt said.
Great, thanks.
Okay, great. Navigation's all gone brilliantly. We're nice and confident, thinking we're ace of the base, and we've got to get into general airwork now. So question 4, let's have a look at another poll then, please, just to keep us all engaged. And I shall be interested to see what people make of this, because in our prep, the 3 of us had a good chat about it last night, actually. So which of the following formats is the correct one to use in response to an air traffic service unit saying pass your message. So look, they all start with call sign, but then there's some subtle differences: type, from, to, via, position, altitude, request, repeat, tracking, VFR, POB, times, lots of different things in there as well. I'm going to give people about 10 or 15 seconds to read through all these, because these are quite long as well here. And I did give poor old Nigel some stick on this, because he's a PPL ground exam guru, and I said he was being unkind in setting this question, but it's a very relevant, important one too. So hopefully people have had a go at that. If you haven't had a chance to have a go at, or you didn't come up with an answer, don't worry, that's fine. Let's have a look at what the correct answer is then, please, Chris. There you go. So this since, oh, look at that. People did well. Excellent. 45%. That's a good score.
I'm impressed.
Yeah. So since January 2021, this has been the correct format. There has been changes and updates to format. CAT 413, as hopefully many of you are familiar with, gives us our correct phraseology to use, and this is the correct type there as well. And the so what of this, the reason we put this in is the CA and the RT examiners are very much on a push to sharpen up and slicken our RT. Our RT is often very congested. There's a lot going on, especially if you're working services like Farnborough down in the south of the UK. So we need to get the information across in a nice, slick fashion. So that's the current phraseology. Those of you who are students preparing for your RT ground exam or your RT practical test, there you go. There's a good top tip for you to impress with that as well. Excellent. Let's move on then to have a look at general air work as well. So what are the key things we're looking for here? Really, accuracy and smooth flying. So we're looking for you to fly accurate headings, heights, angles of bank, and also fly the aircraft correctly when we're demonstrating the stalling part of this section, which we'll come on to a little bit more in a minute. This section's obviously often quite busy. There's quite a lot going on. Managing the positioning of the aircraft can be quite hard work during this section. So your examiner very, very well take responsibility for the navigation and or the RT in this this part of the section. And to be perfectly honest with you, we generally do this because we want to manage the flight, so we're in a suitable area for some of the exercises that come afterwards and the rejoin back to the airfield. So we will often help manage the area that we're operating in to make the flight run efficiently for you as well. The key thing with the general airwork section is to make sure you've practiced everything beforehand and you're confident in all the various aspects. What often happens is people may have done some of the exercises like PFLs and stalling quite early on in their PPL training course. They then get into the navigation. Sometimes they hit bad weather. They're waiting for the solo cross country to get the weather to get that in and things. And then suddenly they're up ready for skills test. And some of these disciplines you may not have practiced a lot or practiced recently. So make sure, and you run up to your skills test, you take every opportunity to do mock tests with instructors or senior instructors perhaps in your flying school to run through all of these disciplines so that you're happy with them as well. The examiner will ask you in the pre-test brief as well, have you practiced and are you happy with everything that I've asked you to do in the brief as well? That will be part of the brief as well. In this section as well, if you're unsure of how the examiner is asking you to set up a stall or stall the aeroplane, or whether they want to see different set angle of bank or whatever, in the pre-brief, this is a good time to raise this and ask any clarification if you're unsure of anything that the examiner's discussed in the brief. But this isn't the time to be asking the examiner how to fly a steep turn. You should know that it's just for clarification, so make sure you've practiced it as well. If we can move on the slide, please, Chris. Let's have a look at stalling. There's going to be 3 stalls in the PPL test. If you're doing a renewal test for the class rating, there's at least 1 is mandatory, but you'll typically get 2 or more depending on how long you've been out of flying as well. Many people are quite nervous about stalling, and there's no need to be. And the aim of this is to demonstrate that you can recognise the signs and symptoms of a stall and carry out safe and effective standard stall recovery. Okay, we're not looking for any real clever dynamic manoeuvring of the aeroplane or anything in this. We're just looking that you can recognise things are going wrong towards or actually in the stall, and you can safely recover from it without any overt fuss and drama. It's all a nice controlled, it's not a panicked exercise, this as well. 3 stalls there, and I'll let you look at those as well. I don't like the wording on these personally. I find them quite a mouthful to describe, both in the brief and in the air as an examiner. But you think about these from a scenario basis. Okay, the first one is pretty much an academic stall to demonstrate the standard stall recovery from the full stalled condition. The second one is all about a simulated mishandled base leg to final turn. That's what that is trying to simulate and do. The third one is trying to simulate a mishandled final approach. You've perhaps sometimes heard the terminology stretching the glide, getting low and slow, and not flying the aircraft appropriately on the final approach. So try and visualize those scenarios and how they relate to real life and how you're going to set up the aircraft as well. And the examiner should brief you on this, but on the first one, the examiner will be expecting you to fly the aircraft into the stalled condition and recognize and recover from that. And on the second and third ones, you should be recovering by carrying out the recovery at the first sign of the approaching stall, which will usually be the audio warner or the light buffet. Okay, let's have a look at some common errors in this section then. And I'm going to pick up here about the accuracy here as well. Okay, we're not looking for utter perfection. You know, we're not looking for the next Blue Angels pilot or the next Red Arrows pilot here on the PPL skill test. So if things go slightly wrong, or you know, you drift off your heading or drift off your height, just let the examiner know that, and that you're correcting back to it. So that's all we want to see, that you're trying to maintain those datums. We all know things will drift off and go wrong. I did my IR renewal myself on a really thermic day out of Cambridge earlier this year, and I was working really, really hard to keep my desired altitude. But as long as you're recognizing when you are drifting away and trying to get back to it, that's what the examiner is after there as well. And let's have a look at some top tips in this section. Yeah, lookout is really what we want to do. Before going into the steep turns, try and fly accurately, like we said. Try and be pedantic as well, because if you're aiming to maintain 3,000 feet and you accept 3,100, well, when you get an inevitable thermal or bit of sink and you drift away from it, you're already quite away from the datum that you want. So work really hard to try and maintain the datums, and then when you get inevitable small fluctuations, they're going to be smaller away from the datum than they could be otherwise. And be positive with the aircraft and carrying out the standard stall recovery. Again, what we're not talking about is aggression. We're doing aggressive inputs or aggressive movements of the aircraft. Being positive is, you know, not letting the aircraft fly you. You're using the controls to select the attitudes and the movements that you want of the aircraft as well. But we don't want to overdo it. If we hit an excessive pitch down, is we're trying to pitch down until we've removed the symptoms of the stall. If we overdo it, that's when we can get excessive height loss in the recovery. So it's like most things in flying, it's a balance. And in the spiral descent recovery, remember to reduce the power if required as you roll the wings level, because what we're trying to do is prevent further acceleration. And even on a fixed pitch propeller, it can be quite easy to get towards the overspeed limits on the propeller pitch as well. So airwork has gone well, and now we've got to get back to the airfield. So over to Nigel to get us back to the airfield.
Okay, so the secret is not to relax at this point. So let's go with another poll, shall we? And here we go with this one. So if you're asked by ATC to report a long final, where should you do this? Is it prior to forward order commands from the runway, when lined up on the approach and you can see the runway, or when you're at 3 nautical miles from the touchdown point, or between 3 and 5 nautical miles from the runway. So there's your choices. In fact, you might opt to choose a long final rather than be directed to call long final by ATC. So this is your chance of working out where you would be if you needed to make that call. Okay, quite a quick one. So hopefully you've all answered that. Let's have a look at the right answer then. So the answer is prior to 4 nautical miles from the runway. And let's have a look. Yep, and well done to most of you. Most of you got that right again. Basically, if you the RT manual contains this bit of information as well. So CAP 413, like most of the RT stuff, is where you need to look for this. And what it is another common thing that I'd just like to raise is lots of people, you'll hear lots of people say that they are on final. And that's really, really easy to misinterpret with a long final. So if you look in CAP 413, you won't find that when you call final, it doesn't say Golf Alpha Charlie on final, it's Golf Alpha Charlie final. And that's the reason for it. So missing out words is just as important in RT as putting words in. So just be careful with that. Right, so let's have a look at the next slide then. Approach and landing procedures. We can take the poll down, please. Thank you. Okay, is the poll still up on your screens? Thank you very much. Right. Okay, so having successfully taken off then and completed our navigation and general handling, obviously there'll be some emergency sections in there as well, which we'll talk about in a sec. So all that remains is to get back to the airfield and to join and complete the selection circuits. So the fact that you're familiar with your airfield is probably going to be a bit of a bonus, which is going to help you, of course, since generally you're going to land back at the airfield you took off from. But it's still worth brushing up on the arrival procedures before you fly them on the test, just to make sure you actually do fly it correctly and by the book. So once you've joined, which you will decide how you will join, the examiner will not direct you, it will be up to you to decide what join procedure you would like to do based on traffic information, for example. Then one of the things the examiner is going to ask you to do will be a precision or a short field landing. And if there's a crosswind, well, you have to deal with it. There'll be a crosswind short field landing as well. We'll also ask you to do a flat plus landing and an approach to landing using idle power, which you probably, we all know as a glide approach. So some examiners might want to see those individually. Some examiners might combine a couple together. For example, I mentioned about crosswind and the other landings will obviously go together. And it just depends on the conditions of the day. And it might not be in that order. The examiner will usually tailor the order to fit in with the traffic around the airfield. So you'll be expected to do touch and goes in the circuits, but if you need to stop and re-taxi, for example, because of good airmanship, you landed too far down the runway or something along those lines, then you should do so. Okay, you are in charge of the flight for the purposes of the test. Or the examiner might ask you to stop and re-taxi back to the hold and then do a normal departure. So once you've completed your last landing, it's not over yet, I'm afraid, because you've still got to do all of the taxi back to the stand, the shutdown checks, and the booking back into the clubhouse. So keep focused, taxi back to the apron or the dispersal or the parking space. Don't forget to follow all the ATC instructions and shut down the aircraft in a safe manner, usually with a checklist, because that's you've got time to do that. And don't rush, okay? It's not over yet. So if you haven't seen it, there's a great video made by John Hunt, the flying reporter, that covers departures and arrivals. You might see someone you might recognize here as well, along with some common mistakes. And you can check it out via the website, and links going in the chat box now. Okay, so let's have a look at some common errors in this area then. So things like missing ATC calls in a busy circuit, not identifying all the circuit aircraft during the join. You need to make sure you know how you fit into the traffic that's already there. Indeed, forgetting the RT calls, perhaps making RT calls in the incorrect place. When the pressure's on, you'd be surprised at the mistakes people make. Not flying a standard circuit. You know, we're trying to say to people, you know, you're hopefully about to get a parts license and be let loose into the real world, shall we say. So we need to be confident that you're able to follow the correct procedures. You'll often find the examiner will designate an area of the runway in which you must touch down. So that's enabling the examiner to see that you are in control of the aircraft during that landing phase. If it's a crosswind, obviously you need to be able to deal with the crosswind as well and not land with excessive drift on that might cause the aircraft some harm. So how about some top tips then? So probably the biggest thing that I'll say to you is think out loud. Examiners cannot mind read. Okay, so if you've made a decision and that's what you're going to do, just let the examiner know so we understand why you've made it and the thought process you're going through. Don't be afraid to go around. If it's a poor approach, do as you've been trained. Okay, just because the examiners ask you to land there doesn't make any difference. If it's not working out, go around. Sometimes ensure you don't descend below your minimum approach height if you have one, or if you don't have a clearance and the runway's not clear. You'll often find that might be an airfield specific altitude or a club or a training organization limit within their standard operating procedures. Try and control your speeds accurately. Keep the indicated airspeed, the IIS, in the instrument scan during the approach. You get too quick, you're going to float and you can land long. If you get too slow, then obviously you might land heavy or land too short. Okay. So over to Matt again, who's going to talk about those things I mentioned earlier, abnormal and emergency procedures.
Just jumping in very quickly with a quick question, if I may. This one's from Louise to you, Nigel. Will a go around need to be demonstrated?
It is in the test. You will often find that we don't necessarily do the go around as part of the circuits, but if you have to do one, then feel free to do it. Usually that happens out in the field as part of the emergency procedures that Matt's about to do with regard to the forced landings and things. So we've got various places we can put various exercises into within the whole test.
Brilliant, thanks.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Nigel. So let's have a look at abnormal emergency procedures. We'll start with our last poll before we get into these. So if we can have the poll, please. And hopefully, what do you consider to be the most important aspects of dealing with an emergency? Completing the drills, communicating with ATC, navigating, flying the aircraft. Hopefully, most of you have got the hint of the theme that we've been trying to emphasize throughout this presentation, and indeed many of our other presentations that we've done via these safety evenings as well. So I won't dwell too long on this one. So if we can have the answer, please, or what we consider to be the most important aspect, flying the aircraft. Well, hey, look at that, 100%, brilliant.
Never seen 100%er before.
Yeah,
good to
excellent.
see.
Excellent. So absolutely that. And why do we say that? The reason being, as we go through this section, sometimes people may think that getting the drills or word perfect or slick is what the examiner wants to see in order to pass the test. That is absolutely not the case. If the circumstances dictate that you can't get through even half of the emergency checklist items, but you fly the aircraft to what would have become a satisfactory conclusion, for example, that's fine. Certainly on the engine failure after takeoff, what we are looking for is that you maintain good satisfactory control of the aircraft and just point it somewhere, the best option that would be workable as well. I'm not interested in all of the word perfect checks from the checklist during that, if it's going to compromise you flying the aircraft or getting to what would have been a safe outcome. So yeah, good. Let's move on to have a look at a few bullets. Yeah, so we talked about these will, as Nigel's already said, these are going to be integrated throughout the flight potentially. But as a minimum, you're going to get a simulated, a FARTO simulated engine failure after takeoff, a simulated forced landing, and some kind of emergency scenario that leads to a simulated precautionary landing normally as well. Other emergencies may be introduced at some point throughout the test, so be prepared for those and prepared how to deal with them as well. And your examiner should hopefully make it clear, but what they will be expecting is what we sometimes say is touch drills only during these as well. So we wouldn't normally expect you to actually action anything. It is a simulation, hopefully, as you've done all the way through your training so far as well. So have we got next slide, please? So abnormal emergency procedures. Okay, try and learn the memory items if you can, but there's a little flow here as well. So diagnose what's happened, do the immediate actions, the memory items, get control of the aircraft, select best glide speed or whatever's appropriate for there as well. And then just think about what is time sensitive or not time sensitive drills. So what you really need to do is think about what you're dealing with here. If you've got an engine fire or a full engine failure, that could be a very time sensitive drill. You need to get on with doing some things very quickly. You need to action some memory items, come up with a plan and start actioning that plan relatively quickly. If it's, for example, and this is something I often give test candidates as well, is, oh, imagine that this low voltage light has just illuminated on the panel on our navigation exercise. What we don't want to do then is rush into a whole load of actions, compromise flying the aircraft for that. That might be a less time sensitive drill, but we're going to say, okay, well, we've got some checklist drills for that. I'm going to get the checklist out. And while I maintain my lookout attitude instruments, I'm going to hold my checklist up there and I'm going to run through the, the electrical failure drills or whatever it is for your particular aircraft there as well. But do try and think about what you're doing. It's surprisingly how common I often give candidates, and Nigel's probably come across this, we give them an engine fire. They do all beautiful drills to shut the engine down. Brilliant. And then we've set up to go to make a forced landing in the field. Excellent. I'm thinking, this is great. This is going really well. And then the candidate says to me, I've got a bit of time now, so I'm going to try and restart the engine. Well, no, try and think about what you're doing here. You've had an engine fire, you've shut it down, you've got rid of the fire. Brilliant. Now commit to the forced landing scenario and get on with that. Alternatively, if it's a rough running engine, diving straight into shutting down the engine and putting it in a field might actually be a little bit of a rush. It might be that we fly the aircraft, have a plan, think about getting it into a field, but now we've got a bit of time, we are going to attempt to resolve the situation, see if we can recover power or make using residual power take us to a better landing area as well. So try and react to what scenario the examiner is giving you. So let's have a look at some common errors in this section. I think I've pretty much covered all of these. Not diagnosing, not getting on with time sensitive against fly aircraft, poor RT when describing the issue to ATC. Now, on that one as well, yes, try and get your RT and your ATC calls accurate, but ultimately it all comes back to what we keep saying. It's all about flying the aircraft and doing the time sensitive, the critical things as well. If you haven't got the time or you can't remember how to get the most perfect Cat 413 compliant Mayday out, it doesn't matter. It might just be a case of Mayday, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie, got an engine failure, I'm landing in the field, wait out, and then you get on with flying some things or something like that. Okay, so examiners know and understand, and we will react to scenario and what's going on there as well. Let's have a look at some top tips in this section. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Again, it's an old one, but it's there for a reason. We've talked about thinking about the scenario, and we've talked about the RT as well. And like I say, the other emergencies, don't forget the other things that could happen. The low volt or generator light comes on, passengers unwell, a door pops open in flight. Try and think through those scenarios in your own time before the test. There is, again, another great video that was done about emergency handling. It was a whole workshop, actually, And I think Chloe has helpfully just put the link in the chat box there as well, and those links will come out on the email as well. That's a good one to think more about on the subject. Right, so we've got to the end of the test. So here's just a couple of top tips just to think about for the whole test. Yeah, prepare yourself. This is not about having all the books ready and having the perfect. This is you. You need a good night's sleep. You need to get to the airfield in plenty of time. Get fed, get watered, and this is just as crucial as pre-flighting the aircraft as well. Don't be afraid to take a small bottle of water in the aircraft. A lot of candidates do that. I have no problem with that at all. Although, you know, massive cans of pop that are going to spray everywhere, probably not appropriate. Just have a nice sports bottle of water if you need a drink during the flight as well. Make sure you've got, if it's hot or cold, appropriate clothing, sunglasses and things as well. Do your route study. So this is, you know, when you've planned your route or operating area, take time to mentally walk through it, think what fixes and features you are going to use and what airspace is around you. Try and build that mental model of everything in your flight. And this is going to help you having excessive time going heads down, reading the map during the flight. You want to be up, looking out as much as possible. And if you've got that mental model, you know, I'll set off from here. My next fix is at 6 minutes and I'm looking for Morton in Marsh Disused Airfield on my left. You know, that preconditions it in your brain. Cut out the crap. It's abbreviated there. What do I mean by that? Yeah, there isn't, and got to be careful here because we've done a thing with Transair, haven't we? But hey, you don't need to take the entire contents of the Transair catalogue with you flying it. You don't want to take pens and loads of stuff to drop everywhere. So take what you need, make sure it's secure, accessible during flight. So you don't want to take loads of change in your pockets, car keys, and all of the junk and things with you, or don't want to take your whole PPL bag, books with you. You know, just take what you need and have it accessible and ready to use as well. Having your mobile with you is great, especially in the event of a forced landing, but turn it off or into flight mode as well. I've had lots of people on tests with mobiles ringing or the mobiles buzzing away with notifications, and it's distracting. And as well, depending on your headset as well, you can sometimes get that horrible electronic buzzing in the headset as well from phones, which is really distracting for the candidates. Try and relax during the flight. Easy for us examiners to say, isn't it? Well, like I said before, remember, we're not looking for perfection. We're not selecting the next member of the Red Arrows. What we just want to see is a safe, competent, well-handled flight, as if you were solo or you were taking your friends or family flying and things. If you do make mistakes, let the examiner know that you've recognised it, and let them know that you're correcting it as well. It's not an immediate fail. We're not like a driving test where you just tick up some points and that's it. Yeah, if you just let the examiner know what you're doing, and Nigel's really well explained that. Let the examiner get inside your head so you can see what you're doing. And remember, as examiners, we have far more tests than you every year. We have to renew all of our stuff and our ratings and all the rest of it. We're getting tested all the time as well. So we know what it's like. We really do. I've done already, I'm sure Nigel has, I've done 4 renewal tests this year of my own already. So we know what it's like getting tested, and we sympathise. And the final thing is, don't worry about what the examiner is doing. Okay, so examiners, we're not supposed to distract the candidate. The examiners shouldn't be playing tricks on you. If we aren't chatting away and we go a bit quiet, don't think we're being grumpy and everything's gone bad. That's not the case. We will generally go quiet because we know you need the capacity to concentrate on something or give you space to do something. Okay, so I will not be chatting away to you, distracting you on the rejoin back to airfield, because I know you need to position the aircraft. I know you need to listen to air traffic and get that situational awareness as well. Equally, if the examiner is chatting an inappropriate time or distracting you, don't be afraid to say to the examiner, can you just wait a minute, please? I just need to do this, or I just need to make a call or something like that as well, because that's an essential skill that you're going to have to learn and practice when you are flying with passengers for real as well. Most of us will fly with our own knee boards and take notes and things like that as well. And the final thing to say is, 2 things. don't try and read my writing, because if you're like me, I've got absolutely dreadful writing. You won't be able to read what I'm trying to say in the flight anyway. And we write down all sorts of things, things. We write down clearances, we write down things that we've seen that are really good and we want to comment on. We might do things that we do want to talk about in the debrief. So don't think if we're writing loads of things, it's bad. It might just be that we're writing down the clearance as well. Quite often as well, I'm sure Nigel does this, candidates do things or have things or say things. So I think that's really good. I'm going to nick that for the future. So sometimes I'm writing things down thinking, yeah, I like that. I'm going to nick that. I'm going to steal that. That's good. Yeah, don't worry about what we're writing. That's it from me on the top tips. Chris, I think we're going to move into some Q&A on time, hopefully.
We are. You are correct. Interesting. You mentioned about the chat in the cockpit and worrying about the examiners doing, etc. Oh, and it really resonates with me from when I was learning to fly. I had a couple of different instructors. One very chatty. I thought, oh, this is good because he's talking me through what's going on. And he's chat. And then I had another guy that barely spoke. And I thought every time I flew with a guy that barely spoke, I thought I was in trouble. I thought it was going really badly. And over time, of course, I realized that exactly as you say, he said what he needs to say and he sat back and just let me get on with it. And that actually grew my capacity loads. So when I got over the fear of him not interacting with me, I actually much preferred to fly with him. So just goes to show, as Matt says, if they go quiet, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
I know who you mean, Chris, from our days.
Yeah, indeed.
I know who you mean.
Yeah, it's a long time ago now. Here we go. Right then. Let's move to Q&A then. We've got loads of questions coming in, which is brilliant. I, as always, will be question master. So let's start with one from Freddie, if I may. Is the examiner going to make us do a practice Mayday call to air traffic during a forced landing, or just speak through the radio call to the examiner in the cockpit?
I'm going to let an RT examiner answer that.
There you go. Good answer.
Well, I'm not an RT examiner, but I do a lot of training. No, you won't make it to ATC. The examiner will ask you to simulate. So all of the emergency drills that you will do, the examiner will make pretty clear, or very clear, that they should be touch drills. So you would touch the control and say mixture would be lean, for example. And the same would go for the RT, in that you would actually address the examiner and say, I would make a Mayday call to ATC, and the examiner will go, okay, well, make it to me without pressing the button. And that's how it will work.
Great, thank you. Right, this question is from Roger. What is the exact definition of overhead?
Well, that
anyone?
Overheads within the ATZ, typically 1,000 feet above the circuit height. That would define overhead. Lots of people combine the call overhead, dead side descending. You can combine them if you know exactly what you're going to do, but actually you can go to the overhead and say Golf Alpha Charlie is overhead, and there you would circle whilst you look at the ground and the windsock to determine how you're going to join which runway, what the circuit pattern is, and then you will descend on the dead side after that. So it's within the ATZ, typically overhead the airfield, where you can see the runways and the windsock, and 1,000 feet above the circuit height.
Perfect, lovely, thank you very much. Right, this next one's from Henry. How would we demonstrate LAI, so lookout attitude instruments, to the examiner whilst flying?
So I'll take this one. So lookout, we can tell within the first 5 minutes of being airborne whether you're looking out appropriately. Okay, so you don't need to role play exaggerating, rolling ahead, doing massive movements or whatever. Remember, the examiner is sat there in the right hand seat. We're in what is sometimes called a capacity seat. Yeah, so we're not flying the aircraft. We've got time to look around and watch what's going on as well. Believe me, we can see quite quickly whether you're looking out effectively or whether your head's down, staring at the instruments as well. So it should be hopefully quite natural to you, but we will expect to see some movement, see you looking out. And a lot of aircraft we fly as well, you will notice, in fact, the grob behind me in my picture has got quite a wide canopy arch. Some of the aircraft you fly will be canopy arch as well. And we can tell if you've seen students are looking around the canopy arch. You do it quite naturally if you are looking out. So it's quite apparent to me, and I'm sure Nigel will agree, if candidate's not looking out, it is quite obvious quite early on as well. So
great, brilliant, thank you. This next one's from Trevor. He says he's doing a LAPL course. Will his skills test be any different?
So if you want to look at the schedules, it's not some kind of closely guarded secret. If you want to look at the PPL skill test schedule, the form we use as examiners for a PPL test, it's SRG 2128. For a LAPL test, it's an SRG 2127, the form. So the only difference is the navigation section may be a little bit shorter, and there's no 180 turn on instruments in the LAPL test, and there is no radio navigation aids usage on the test as well. Other than that, the test is, for all intents and purposes, the same. So
there's also no spiral dive recovery, strangely, as well.
Yeah, which
is a bit odd, but there we go.
Which is a bit odd, but yeah. But
the other place to look is in standards document 19, which describes all of the test schedules for all of the exams. So in there will be PPL and LAPL as well.
Yeah, and
if you want a few more words around it,
Yeah, Andy Lowe, I think, picked up on that. He said should be a mandatory read. Absolutely, so it describes it really well in there.
Yeah, we'll send the link out to that after this. Okay, let's have a question from James here. On the rejected takeoff, do you recommend that during the briefing on the ground, prior to taxi takeoff, you carry out the touch drill as part of the process?
Okay, well, rejected takeoff, you'll be briefed at the hold that you should, or how I do it is you should treat this as a normal takeoff. Indeed, we prepare the aircraft to take off in case we reject the rejected takeoff. We follow that one through. So we prepare to get airborne. So you will then do a normal takeoff, and on that takeoff roll, at an appropriate point, the examiner will give you a scenario again that you probably will elect not to continue the takeoff with. And again, the brief by the examiner will be pretty precise. He'll say, or they'll say, you do the rejected takeoff in this case, and you bring the aircraft to a stop, and you carry on with the scenario, even if you are sitting on the runway. That's the examiner's problem, not yours. You carry on with the scenario. And if we're in the way, the examiner will often say, okay, pause. They'll press your pause button. The examiner may well then move the aircraft off to one side onto the taxiway and then press play, carry on with the scenario, what you would then carry on doing. So you won't get a heads up on it. You'll know it's coming because you'll be briefed that it will be part of the test, but you won't know exactly what it is until after you've taken the start of the takeoff run.
Brilliant, thanks. That probably leads nicely into this next question, which is from Bartos. Is it okay to think about the examiner as a resource, as in CRM, during the test?
So what I say to my candidates, and I'm sure Nigel very much does the same, is I say, treat me as an interested passenger. So imagine that you're taking one of your family members or one of your mates flying. I'm not going to act stupid and act disruptive or anything like that. Equally, treat me as if I'm a non-pilot passenger effectively. So I'm not going to dial up frequencies for you. I'm not going to help you map read or do something like that. But if you ask me to hold a checklist or hold a map or something like that, I would do that, as hopefully a passenger would do. Yeah. So what can be useful is during, like say, some of the diversion or some of the checklist items or whatever, you might say, can you just hold this for me or while I'm doing something like that? And I would do that appropriately, yeah.
Thanks. Anything to add on that, Nigel?
No, exactly right. If you drop a pen, you can ask me to pick it up. I will. If you need your map refolded for some strange reason, I can refold your map according to the directions you give me. Just like Matt says, we're just a helpful passenger who doesn't know how to fly.
So it's a good distraction techniques then. So start dropping your pens. The examiner will start picking them up. You won't notice what you're doing when you wander off heading. I like what you've done there. Right, let's moving on then to a question from Fraser. This has got an interesting one actually, because there's a lot in this webinar, because there's a lot in the test, right? So Fraser's question is, roughly how long does the exam last from brief to debrief? How long does the test last?
Well, the actual flying is usually somewhere between 2 hours and 2.5 hours. So that's the flight time. It's usually typically about 2 hours 15. It depends on the speed of the aeroplane as the speed the nav goes, really, as much as anything. But in a typical training aeroplane, it's about 2 hours 20, 2 hours 15, something like that. Prior to that, the briefing, the examiner won't rush it, and you shouldn't put the examiner in a position that they are rushed, because you need to get there early in good time. I tend to successfully brief someone in about an hour. So it's a fairly lengthy thing. We want to go through stuff carefully so that you know exactly what's going to happen. Then you need to probably prep the aeroplane. Somewhere in there, you might, it's a total of an hour. So you might also have to plan the route, although often I might give someone the route the evening beforehand, to be honest. It gives them a little bit more of a heads up. Certainly not 24 hours beforehand, because then they can go ask the school lots of questions and things. But once they're at home, okay, they can plan the route and then go in the next day to save a little bit of time. But certainly flying is 2 hours, 2 hours 30, and certainly the briefing at least an hour, plus time to then prep the aeroplane up outside of that time. And the debrief probably half an hour or so. Don't know what you do, Matt.
Yeah, very, very similar to that as well. However, some of us have restrictions. So I do a lot of tests out of Oxford, for example. We're very restricted on circuit slots. So often, well, in fact, every time I have a slot, I will have a particular half-hour slot, but I need to complete the circuits element of the test in there. So for me as an examiner, as Nigel alluded to, it puts me under quite a bit of pressure to manage the flight, to get the circuits in that time. So while we don't want to be rushed, equally, I kind of need a candidate to get on with it. And, if we've agreed timescales, we need to try and meet them, because otherwise the test won't run to thing. What can be really useful is if you plot back. So if I say to a candidate, I want to be getting off chocks at this time, if you know that you've got that kind of restriction, try and work back and think, right, well, we need to be walking out to the airplane at this time. We need to have booked out at this time. We need to meet at this time, and just have a little timeline of how you need to do things, and know that timeline, and that can be quite useful as well, so that you're not rushing.
Great, thanks. Couple of questions. Here goes another one from Richard. He says, I thought that after your skills test, you needed to complete your SEP rating on the ground and answer a few questions about the aircraft.
So we will integrate the class rating questions during the flight and the pre-brief and the walk around and so on as well. So that's certainly how I do it. So it's integrated throughout the flight, and we might ask things like, can you, as we're walking around the aircraft, for example, I might say, can you just explain the fuel system on this aircraft? How much fuel we carry, how much we use, and how it works as we're doing the walk round or the check A and things like that. So that I integrate it throughout the flight rather than doing it as a separate detail. I don't know if Nigel, you do the same.
Yeah, very, very similar. I often also use the question and answer session afterwards about if I've noticed things during the flight, if I want to clarify something to my knowledge as to your knowledge of the operation of the aircraft, then that's where that will come out towards the end. But like Matt says, it's pretty much integrated throughout all of the tests. The whole exam, the whole flight test is just one big scenario, basically. It's take me flying, and we're going to ask you to do a few odd things along the route, or after the route, and some circuits afterwards, and it will all come out in the wash in there. So there's no hard and fast sort of designated areas during the test. Certainly when we have to put it down on paper afterwards, there's areas in which you pass, fail. But it's just all one big integrated flight.
Cool, thank you. Okay, question from Louise regarding VOR DME. So how much am I likely to be asked about a VOR DME for a PPL skills test? Am I likely to need to demonstrate it, or would this be an explanation to the examiner?
So you will have to identify, you will have to demonstrate selecting, tuning, identifying, getting a fix, and then intercepting and tracking a radio aid of some description. So exactly how that works out and exactly how it works will depend on a number of things. It depends on what the aircraft is fitted with, and often in school aircraft, what is working sometimes. And it also depend on where you are in the country as well, because as people will know, the number of radio aids is decreasing around. You may be in areas where there's only a choice of one VOR DME to use as well. So this is exactly the kind of thing that I recommend in that hour pre-brief with the examiner. You discuss and make clear what the examiner wants to see on there as well. Sometimes we have to add a bit in orally as well, just to test another thing. So if the aircraft's only got, I don't know, a VOR DME, for example, I might say to a candidate, have you ever flown with an NDB and ADF? How does that vary? You know, and that might be something that we can use as part of the Q&A. But we're not testing IRs here, you know, so we only want to see, you know, a basic competent appreciation and usage, not perfection in this area, I would say.
But you have to do it. It's not just a question. Yeah.
Okay, so the aircraft needs to be have some kind of appropriate equipment where you can satisfy the requirements of this section. Yeah.
Good out. Right then, this one's from Alistair. He says he's learning an Cessna 150 which can't carry full fuel. How would you run the test if you had to come back and refuel?
Well, the rude answer is to find an examiner that weighs less than me. I'd rather not use that. There are some small examiners around. Yes, fully aware, 150s, 152s, it is a problem. There is no problem with doing your test in multiple flights. And there is also no problem with doing, so back in the day, as I'm sure Nigel remembers, you used to do a navigation test and you used to do a general skills test. There is still no problem with splitting the flights in two. You can quite happily do that within the regulations as well. There are some pitfalls and some things around that which you may want to discuss with your school or examiner, but it is absolutely no problem to do a test in two parts. As examiners, we are trained to run and run the paperwork like that as well. So that's quite possible as well. What you need to be clear on is what you're doing in each flight and each test there as well. So it does require a little bit of coordination with the examiners as well. But I have done PPL tests, even some this year, where weather has unexpectedly prevented us from doing bits of it. So we've had to complete a bit of the test in a subsequent flight. We also had problems with the airfield on return, so we couldn't complete the circuits. So it's what we call an incomplete test. Okay, so we won't debrief you on what you've done on the first flight. We will wait, complete the test, and then we do all of the debrief and the paperwork. Is that your experience as well, Nigel? So.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, if you do need to split the test, as Matt said, you need to be aware of what the implication of that is. Yeah, and we won't go into it here, but you know, you're going to get looked at twice effectively in some areas. That's what the problem is.
Okay, great. A follow on thing from that from Martin. He's asked whether refueling or ground handling would form part of the test if required.
Well,
an interesting one.
It depends. If you're expected to refuel the aeroplane because no one else is going to do it for you, then you're expected to refuel the aeroplane. The examiner's not going to do it for you because, you know, we might be visiting that airfield for the first time, possibly. So you know, it's all part of the pre-flight preparation as much as the paperwork and everything else and the pre-flight checks. You know, typically one of the questions that we might ask is, what fuel are you putting in it, and how do you know it's right for the aeroplane, and things like that. So yeah, you're expected to get the aeroplane fit for the flight in question.
Good stuff. Right, another one here. So this one's from Kaylee. Interesting one, quite up for debate, I think. What's your advice if we fail the test? Interesting one. Positively, of course, you wouldn't fail the test, so don't know why she's asking that, clearly.
When you fail the test, the examiner has some additional paperwork to do. So we will have to detail exactly the area that you failed or the items that you failed and the reason why. The examiner then has an option. We can either then recommend or mandate some additional training required before you then are allowed to submit yourself for another test. And typically all of that paperwork would be given, well, it is given back to the candidate for them to take to their school or their instructor, so they can see exactly the areas that you failed on and the reasons why. Do the training to brush those things up, and probably, I would add, also revise some of the other bits and pieces as well, so you haven't forgotten them at the expense of just concentrating on these bits you failed on, and go from there. So it's not just a, oh, you've failed, it's I'm afraid you haven't succeeded this time. Here are the reasons why, here are the bits you failed on, and specifically why you failed those particular bits. And here's my recommendation of what you do before you go back. And typically we don't recommend what training is required. We typically recommend, we'd recommend you do at least another hour or at least another 2 hours, perhaps, along those lines. Don't know if you've got anything to add, Matt?
No, absolutely that. And remember that full failures are relatively rare. The vast majority of people pass their test, which is what we would expect, because we hope and expect that our instructors only put candidates forward to test when they're ready to pass the test. Sometimes people have a problem or an issue, and the more possible outcome is a partial pass. So you may have failed one section, like the navigation or part of the airwork or part of the circuit, and then you have to do some retraining and refly that part of the test. I did a partial test and a partial refly only last week on the navigation section, because it just didn't quite go as the candidate would wish it to in the navigation. So that's not uncommon. What I would say is, if you fail a test, don't stress about it. Most of us has. I failed my first navigation test. We were overhead of the airfield, and my examiner said to me, "What's that airfield down there?" I said, "It's North Luffenham, disused airfield." And he said to me, "Oh, what's that grey fast jet taking off from it then?" I was like, perhaps it's Cottesmore. And dates it a little bit, as when Cottesmore was open. So I failed my first nav test as well, and that was because I didn't aviate, navigate, communicate. I was busy gabbing away to air traffic and missed the turning point. So most of us have experienced some kind of partial failure in our lives. We know what it feels like as well. But what I say to my candidates is, don't take this to heart. What happens, it will make you a better pilot in the long run, having failed a test and had to redo something as well. Okay, especially if you have that failure earlier in your flying career. I think it makes you relax more for subsequent tests, and makes you kind of get into the groove of subsequent tests more in a strange way. Okay, so if you sail through everything, having passed everything without any adverse comment or issues, I think it's not always the best experience. So don't take it to heart. Don't think it's the end of the world for you. It really isn't. Yeah.
Right, some good sage advice there. Right, okay, this one's from Mark. For the nav, is it okay to use thumb and hand for distance and estimate bearings by eye, or would you recommend doing something differently?
Yes, please do. Yes, for the diversion, it's not a precision exercise. I could guarantee, with a little bit of practice, if I went and drew 2 points on a whiteboard in the classroom, everybody on this call that's learning to fly or has got a license holder could give me an estimated bearing between the 2 points. Everybody could do it. And you know what? The top of your thumb there, that's 10 nautical miles on a half mil chart. That 98% of the people in the world. Yeah. So you've got the tools there to estimate a heading, estimate a distance very, very quickly. Okay. So it's amazing the number of people, if we do it on the ground as a practice, they can go, yeah, it's about 150, about 30 nautical miles. And it's generally about right. But then what happens in the air, people get all these protractors and 3-colored pens out. And
it's because they're trying to distract the examiner.
Yeah.
We've talked about that before.
Try and draw this absolute precision diversion. Meantime, the aeroplane's gone 5-10 nautical miles away from where we want to divert from. We've descended altitude, we've drifted off heading, and we're now heading towards a big bank of cloud. I'm being slightly flippant, but the point is, in the diversion, we want you to make a good estimate of the distance, time, apply a sensible wind correction to it, and then we want you to get on with it, okay? Because the scenario is you've hit bad weather or something like that, you need to divert. So we don't want to spend 20 minutes in an orbit doing the most perfect plan and then divert. We want you to sort of make a good estimate of it and get on with it, if that makes sense. I don't want that to appear or sound flippant. It isn't, but hopefully, Nigel, that's similar to what you find.
And absolutely, you'll find the examiner will probably brief you to say, when I give you the diversion, I expect you to be heading in that direction within 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And sometimes it means you just do the rough, as Matt says, the rough idea first, get the aeroplane heading roughly in that direction, note the time that you've set course, get the aeroplane heading in that direction, and then start refining it once you're on the way and doing the rest of the calculations that you might need to do.
Yeah, and you just need to trust in yourself. Honestly, you wouldn't believe it. You can all come up with really, really good estimates. You've just got to believe in them and then go and fly that plan.
Good stuff. I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions. So let's quickly run through. This is a good one from Martin. Can you outline any differences between the first flight test and recertifying a lapsed PPL?
Okay, so your first flight test is for the issue of a license and an SEP class rating, typically. Okay, when you have a lapsed, your license doesn't lapse, it's the SEP class rating that lapses on your license. It's a bit like your driving license. Your driving license says you're a driver of a car, and on the back of it, it tells you what you can drive. And the PPL license is exactly the same. Once you've got a PPL license, it's for life. You can forever call yourself a pilot. That doesn't expire. What you're allowed to fly does expire. So there is a difference between the two. One's called an LST, a license skills test. The other one is called a license proficiency check, strangely, even though it's actually only to do with the actual class rating. So there's a few different bits and pieces, like we don't have to do 2 nav legs. There's a little bit of navigation involved. And to be honest, it's much more down to the examiner as to what the content of an LPC is, which will depend upon how long that rating has elapsed for. So we need to be confident, in your abilities at the end of the day, and we will test accordingly. There's some mandatory stuff that we have to do, but some of it is a little bit more free for the examiner to decide based on our experience and, as I said, how long you have been lapsed for. Does that answer it, Matt, anymore?
No, if I'm honest as well, the tests where we have more difficulties, in my experience, are on SEP class rating renewal or revalidation. Well, the vast majority of people that take PPL tests have been working up to it. They're quite current. They've been doing a lot of recent flying, and they know what they're doing as well. People that are revalidating or renewing sometimes have more issues that we need to work on than your basic PPL candidate. So yeah.
Good stuff. Right. We've still got a whole bunch of other questions, but unfortunately we don't have the time for that. But I'm going to offer a solution to that shortly. Right. So, audience, thank you ever so much for coming this evening. Hopefully you've all been able to take something away from this. And if there's anything you'd like to revisit, the replay for this will be through our website, and you're going to be sent an email with a whole bunch of resources after this anyway. So please have a look at that. Before we go, of course, I need to mention the winner The winner of the £250 of Transair voucher is, drum roll please, Angela Donnelly. Well done, Angela. We will be in touch with you as soon as this webinar finishes. Congratulations. Okay, once we finish tonight, a survey is going to pop up, so please do take the time to fill that in. I'm thinking, given the fact that we've got lots and lots of questions here about running an examiner/flying instructor drop-in session, which has no agenda, but come in and fire your question in. If you think that'd be useful, then please pop that in the survey, because we'd love to get that feedback. I think it might be quite useful, and we can then explore not only the PPL skills test, but any other things that you want to talk about. We have, however, run out of time this evening, so a huge thank you to Matt and Nigel for being our experts on the panel this evening and answering all your questions and taking us through the PPL skills test. So thanks ever so much for that. And hopefully I will see you all again soon. Don't forget to sign up to the next webinar. Thanks ever so much.
Bye-bye.